Good evening. Episode of Black and White with
I think you're breaking up here, Sister Jacqueline. Hmm. To anyone who is watching, Sister Jacqueline is having some difficulty getting into the show. It says I'm in the show, but she's having some difficulty getting in, so I suspect it's an internet problem on her side.
All right. I hope that solves this problem.
Okay.
So sorry about that, everyone. Had some really weird tech issues. So, obviously, I've got a lot going on here. And just to let you know, I've got a bunch of other stuff now connected to my Wi Fi network because of what I call cycletta, my dialysis machine. This is actually a blood cycler. That's the literal name of the machine because that's what it does. So it cycles my blood through the machine, cleans it through the dialysate, all that kind of stuff. So I named her Cycletta. Um, and so Cycletta is connected to the Wi-Fi network because while I'm doing treatment, it automatically uploads all of the information about my arterial pressure, my heart rate, when my blood pressure, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, okay. Now, so sorry about that, Dr. Tawheed. So sorry about
No
that.
problem.
Um, all our friends in Lukman Nation, thank you, thank you, thank you for sticking it out. So we've got a lot to talk about, actually. And I actually wanted to start with something that I just saw um, before we started the show. And I don't know if you had heard this, but there's something that she said, something that was said that I think leads us into our discussions tonight. And that is the fact that Tiffany Cross, the host of MSNBC's Cross Connection, has just lost her job today. So let's see. Now, are you going to share my screen? Are you going to let me do it? Are you going to? Okay, let's see. All right. I think, really? Oh, we're just having all the problems today. Okay, I don't have time to do all that. All right, but I'm trying to share my screen, and because I reset the computer, Chrome is telling me that it's not letting me have permission for StreamYard for me to share my screen right now. But the gist of the issue is that Tiffany Cross, her show has been canceled on MSNBC just today. And
Mhm.
apparently, the straw that broke the camel's back was her appearance on um, Charlemagne the God show. I really just hate saying his name. I just really do. On his show on Comedy Central, Hell of a Week, where she said about Florida, where Charlemagne asked her which state Democrats could afford to lose in the upcoming midterm elections. And her response was, Florida literally looks like the dick of the country. So let's get rid of Florida. She said, let's castrate Florida. Now, I, okay, fine, you know, but really what I think is her insistence on, and I think insistence is kind of a strong word because we're not talking about someone who was radical in her analysis, right? Tiffany Cross is a very supportive member of the Democratic Party. From the times I watched her show, she didn't do a lot of actual criticism of the party. In the little bit that she did was very light and tepid. Um, but I think she said two things after this, castrate Florida comment. She said that it was impossible to separate the Republican Party from right wing extremists, saying that they had merged right now.
Mhm.
Excuse me. And she also noted that when we're talking about the economy, that Black America is not like the stock market. Most people aren't the stock market. And she made the point that when the mainstream media talks about the economy and the economy doing well, they're talking about the stock market,
Mhm.
but they never talk about the difficulties in this economy that Black people have. The fact that Black people are always doing much, much worse
Mhm.
than the media pundits claim when they're talking
Mhm.
about the economy. And
Mhm.
I think those are the two things. I don't really think. I mean, they had to say something. Um, excuse me, but I think we have to be clear that in the corporate media, in the world of corporate media, um, the State Department controls the narrative, and it doesn't matter which it's CNN, MSNBC, it doesn't matter. So you buck that um that narrative enough and they will get rid of you. And you also can't say mean things about the Republican Party, because Democrats still have this thing going on where they insist that Republicans are just, they're decent people at their core and they can be reasoned with, but they're just a little bit misguided. Right? So you can't say inflammatory things about the Republican Party even when they're quite obviously true. But I think the big thing that really got her in trouble with the network was her pushing back the little bit that she did on this narrative that the economy is great,
Mhm.
um, and ignoring the fact that Black people are suffering, that regular working class and poor Americans are suffering, and Black people are suffering even more. So, what are your thoughts
Mhm.
about that? And Tiffany Cross being canned, and what this means for how we have to talk about the economic condition of Black people when it is clear that corporate media will not tolerate
Mhm.
any deviation from the approved narrative in regard to the economic realities of this country, Dr.
Yeah,
Talib.
yes, good question. I hadn't known that beforehand, but not surprising. We are certainly coming. We have to come to a recognition that corporate media is corporate media. It's not just corporate media because it's big business as media. It's corporate media because it carries the flag for corporations, for big business. It is the propaganda arm of big business. And so for her to say that black folks fare worse in an economy than white folks, I mean that's not news. That's well known. I mean the unemployment numbers came out today as they come out this time for every month. The unemployment rate in general is 3.7%. The unemployment rate for blacks is 5.9%. Okay, it has typically, recently, I say recently, decades, been twice the unemployment rate for whites, regardless of what that unemployment rate is. And at times it has been three times the unemployment rate for whites. That's a well-known fact. It's
Mm-hmm.
not it's not a secret. And so for her to say that seems to me that that she's not allowed to say that, particularly prior to an election.
Mm.
An election that will depend heavily on turnout of blacks to get Republicans elected. To remind them on a show that blacks are looking at, whites are not, generally looking at Charlemagne, his show. It's a black oriented show, and so black folks are listening to that show, and they may agree with her and say, yeah, things are doing worse for us, while Joe Biden is campaigning and saying everything is fine, the economy is great. The only thing we have to worry about is those Republicans, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so the president's message, I didn't listen to the speech, but I always listen to synopsis, summaries of it afterwards. I don't think I can get through listening to it.
Yeah.
But his speech was, we have to fear the Trumpers, we have to fear the MAGA folks, we have to fear the dissolution of democracy. And for some, it's not a new thing that democracy has been dissolved. And so it's all about fear. There's no hope in that message. People are
Mm-hmm.
concerned about inflation. Wealthy folks are not that concerned. They can pay their bills.
Right.
But as the poor are struggling to pay their bills in normal times, when rents go up and food goes up and gasoline goes up and other things that you need go up in price, we struggle more than we've struggled before. And so our situation, the situation of black folks, and it's not all black folks. There's some who are doing well, but if we look at the poverty rate, for example, the poverty rate in the country as a whole is 10%.
Hmm.
The poverty rate in the black community is 30%,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
And so that's three times the rate of the poverty rate. And that, excuse me, let me back up. It's not three times the white poverty rate, because the poverty rate for the whole country is 10%. You have to include the poverty rate of blacks at 30% in that 10%, which means that the poverty rate for whites is below 10%, right? To make that
Right.
happen.
Right.
Same thing with the unemployment rate at 3.7%. The unemployment rate for whites is below that, so that it averages out with the black unemployment rate at 5.9%. There have been times in recent months when the unemployment rate for whites has gone down, while at the same time the unemployment rate for blacks has gone up. So to say that we are living in two different economies is a known fact. And if she's fired for that, then the only thing I can think of is she wasn't allowed to say that, particularly before an election, because it might discourage some black folks from going to the polls, because we might say, well, I voted before, it's made no difference.
Mm. Hmm. And, since we are touching on the Black unemployment rate, I mean, the history of Black unemployment is really kind of fascinating. And I
Mhm.
always like to talk about it, particularly from the period of the Great Depression in this country.
Mhm.
So bring us from the Great Depression, where the New Deal was supposed to be, this panacea that solved the economic problems of working class and poor
Mhm.
Americans, to now. What has been this history of Black unemployment, and why is it a specific, unique thing in this
Right.
country?
I don't know if I shared a paper with you. If I didn't, I will share it. Of going back and looking at census data, which is, of course, every 10-year data, looking at the and calculating unemployment rates for blacks and whites from that data. If we go back to the census data, if for that where you can calculate unemployment back to 1910,
Hmm.
the unemployment rate for blacks and whites were about equal in this country. That goes through 1920 and 1930 as well. When we get into the 1930s, the unemployment rate for blacks begins to be higher than the unemployment rate for whites. And it's not only begins to be higher, it has grown since the gap has grown since the Great Depression. And one of the things that is I theorize as causal. When I say theorize, I got lots of evidence for this, right?
Hmm.
Is during the Great Depression, whites who would normally have a low unemployment rate were out of work. Of course, blacks were also, but whites were around the country engaged in various kinds of actions to have blacks fired who were working for them to be hired. So there
Wow.
were there were riots around the country, white riots around the country, where whites, particularly men, white men, would threaten employers, if you have to fire him to hire me, and if you don't, we'll burn down your building, or do something bad to you. And so there's a category of jobs that were called Negro jobs. They were called by a different epithet, right? That black folks, black men particularly, worked in, but also, of course, black women in domestic work. But
Right.
black men as porters and butlers and ditch diggers and these other kinds of heavy manual or demeaning labor. When the depression hit and whites were losing their respectable jobs, their skilled jobs, they couldn't find any. They were taking these jobs from black men. They were pushing them out, and they were doing that by political action, by protest, by violent reaction around the country. It is that process that initiated the unemployment gap between blacks and whites,
Wow.
right? And one of the things that allows that to continue, that makes it cumulative, is that, for example, if you have a job, even if, in the 1910 you're a black man and you're a butler or a porter, let's say a porter, and you're in that job and you have a son. Well, your son gets an opportunity to take your job when you retire, right? Or
Mhm.
even to be hired on as a porter because you're in that position. Once white men take over that work, our sons don't get an opportunity to move into that work.
Right.
Now, understand, I'm not saying that that work is low pay, but it is work, right?
Right.
And we budgeted our expenses according to, to do the best for our families that we could. But once you're out of that work no longer is intergenerationally transferable. And so the unemployment rate goes up in the Great Depression, and it begins to increase after that because we no longer have a foothold in various types of jobs that we have, including footholds in skilled labor work. Because what a lot of people don't understand is during enslavement in this country, we were skilled workers. We were
Right.
bricklayers and carpenters. I mean, we built capitals and things. Once emancipation came through, we were able to continue to use those skills, and many of us going into businesses using those skills as carpenters. Now, our venue was mostly the black community, but we were still able to propagate those skills.
Mhm.
Once the Great Depression comes along, and we're no longer able to work in those skills, the building trades, of course, begins to be in a sense whiter and whiter because we're and labor unions have a part in making sure that black men were no longer able to get positions as union carpenters and bricklayers or as skilled carpenters and bricklayers. So there's an accumulative effect that comes from the Great Depression that we have yet to recover from in terms of employment and income and wealth.
Mm. And I always wonder about the impact of the New Deal because it's always touted
Yeah.
as, the great progressive policy that and it did, of course, it pulled the country and actually I contend that it wasn't the New Deal that pulled the country out of the Great Depression. It was war
Right.
that pulled the country
Eventually.
the Great Depression, because that's how this country has made a lot of its wealth, aside from stealing it from other people. But what impact did the New Deal have? Because people are always making the argument, Dr. Tawheed, that you know black men were able to get jobs through the
Mhm.
New Deal, and if they were not able to avail themselves of those opportunities, then that was their fault.
Yeah, the history and the opportunities of the New Deal were a fantasy for the Black community.
Mhm.
In most places, particularly in the South, but even in the North, you'd go down and sign up for a federal works program if you were allowed to sign up for a federal works program, but you would never be hired. In addition, there were various relief programs that were put in place. The black communities did not benefit from those relief programs. We were on our own through the Depression. And one of the things that was helpful in that is that the black community was mostly a rural community. So
Mhm.
we were out in places where we had some farmland where we could grow our food and so forth on our own. And so that helped us, get through. Many of our families get through that Great Depression. My family is one of those from Virginia. But in terms of the New Deal's effect on the black community, it was nowhere near the effect that it should have been by law because we were excluded by local entities, and the federal government did nothing to enforce that law.
Yeah, I'm actually reading a book. It's way over there. I can't
Mhm,
grab it. Organize, Fight, Win.
mhm,
The Writings of Communist Women, that was edited by Jody Dean. The Writings of Communist Women in Labor Struggles, that was edited by
mhm,
Jody Dean and Dr. Sharice Burton Stelly. And they tackle labor issues for Black women
mhm,
in the domestic arena,
Right.
during this period of time. And it's some fascinating writings, primary source writings from people like Claudia Jones and other folks who were members of the Communist Party of the United States of America, who were actively involved in organizing Black women domestic workers. And the
Hmm.
kinds of things that they expose in their writings was the level of exploitation that Black women were subjected to because Black women had to work
Hmm.
because Black men never were fully enough employed, and if they were employed they didn't make enough money to take care
Hmm.
of the families.
Hmm.
So I mean, this is the book is called Organized Fight: When Black Communist Women's Political Writing. Really fantastic. I encourage and urge you all to get a copy of that book. Primary source documents from communist Black women organizers who are
Hmm.
tackling the issue of Black women's super exploitation during the Depression, during the 30s and the 40s, um, and their efforts to organize Black women and domestic workers in particular. So I just had that thought when you talked that when we're talking about
Hmm.
Black labor.
Hmm.
And you know, Dr. Tawheed, of course, when we talk about Black unemployment and labor and the economy and the way we are indoctrinated with news about the economy, we're always given information about this jobs report, right? Now,
Yeah.
we've talked about the jobs report before, that it's, a bunch of hooey. Um, but of course, the latest jobs report that was released just a few days ago from October
Hmm.
said that, and this is literally what USA Today says. They said hiring stayed strong in October as
Hmm.
employers added 261,000 jobs despite high inflation, rising interest rates, and growing recession fears.
Hmm.
They say the unemployment rate rose from 3.5 to 3.7%. The Labor Department said Friday. Economists had estimated that 190,000 jobs were added last month. The actual gain was the smallest since December 2020. Dr. Tawheed, where are these jobs? I just,
Well, one of the things to understand with these jobs reports is that 261,000 jobs sounds like a lot of jobs,
hmm,
but the economy needs to add about 260,000 jobs every month just to keep up with population growth.
wow.
If it doesn't, then the unemployment rate goes up, and so that may have been, the unemployment rate went up a little bit because the number of new jobs being created were not enough to keep up with population growth. Yeah, because the unemployment rate is calculated from what is called the labor force pool, right?
Hmm.
In order to be in the labor force, you have to be at least 16 years old, right? Well, every month, there are some 15-year-olders who are becoming 16 years old. They are entering the labor force.
Right.
You need to have at least enough new jobs to take care of their employment needs, minus those who are leaving the labor force with retirement, right? So there's a certain amount, it's about 250,000 in a country this size that you need new jobs just to keep up with things as they are. 261,000 seems a little bit more than that, but understand we've talked about this before in terms of the unemployment rate numbers and who gets counted in the unemployed. The fact that 261,000 jobs are created doesn't mean 261,000 full-time jobs.
Right.
And if a company is, let's say, has a full-time employee, let's say 40 hours, and they lay that person off and hire two part-time workers, you have an increase in the number of jobs, right? Or you say to your full-time employee, we can no longer afford full-time. You go to half-time, then that doesn't change anything. And then you hire another part-time worker to fill in the other 20 hours, let's say. and you've got two 20-hour workers instead of one full-time worker. And the benefit to the company in doing that, of course, is they no longer have to have benefits for that employer. So they have the same amount of work, but they've reduced their costs. Profits are going up. And we see this happening, that profits for particularly large corporations is going up, even in this situation where we have an increase in the unemployment rate and this minuscule increase in the number of new jobs, because many of these new jobs are not new jobs; they're just multiple replacements for old jobs.
Mm.
And so the numbers are elusive. They are not what they used to be. An unemployment rate of 3.7% used to say a lot more about who was actually unemployed, because you had mostly full-time workers. If you are considered employed if you made $1 of income in the last 2 weeks. So if you worked for Uber Eats and you delivered a package and you got a $5 tip, and that's all you did in the last 2 weeks, you are
You're
employed.
considered employed.
You're employed. And this economy is creating more and more and more of those kind of jobs. So people are losing their jobs, and then they're going to work for in the gig economy, delivering packages and so forth. They don't come into the unemployment pool. They're still employed.
But we always talk about how another aspect of this, dishonest jobs report is the fact that wages have not increased. And as a
Mhm.
matter of fact, in this very same article, a little bit farther down, they say that last month,
Mhm.
average hourly wages rose 12 cents to $32.58 an hour, lowering the annual increase from 5% in August to a still healthy 4%. And I feel like that is another one of those um, uh, capitalist um, media sleights of hand, because we know most people in this country are not making $32.58 an hour.
Right.
What's wrong with the way they report hourly wages in this context?
Well, you've pointed out that most people are not at the high end in wage increases for folks who are able to demand wage increases does not give you any information about persons who are working minimum wage and unable to get wage increases, because if they don't work, someone else will take their job, right? Is ready to work. A wage increase of 4%, even if it was distributed evenly, right, doesn't keep up with inflation, which is twice that amount, right, 8%.
Right.
And so while wages may go up, the buying power of workers is going down, right? Because it's not keeping up with inflation. And there is this narrative out there. It comes through the Federal Reserve, from Jerome Powell, and from business in general, that inflation is being driven by wage increases,
Hmm.
right? Well, those two numbers, 4% increase in wages and 8% increase in inflation, tells us that wages are not the cause of inflation. Otherwise, the wage increase would be higher than the inflation increase, because the wage increases and then you measure the inflation after that. So if wages are leading, then wages would be higher than inflation. The fact that wages are lower than inflation just means that people are saying, hey, prices are going up. I need some more money.
Hmm.
And those in a position to get it are getting it. Those who are not in a position to get it are not getting it, and that's mostly the working poor, who are just have to take the wages you can get, right?
Right.
But part of that narrative that the wages are the cause of inflation allows the Federal Reserve and Jerome Powell cover to increase interest rates, and blame it on poor folks. Just like the 2008 financial crisis was blamed on what was it called,
Oh, the
Subprime, yeah,
people, yeah, the
subprime
subprime
borrowing.
loans. That,
I, I,
yeah.
I struggle with that term subprime because it makes it sound as if it's below the prime rate,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Much
considerably above the
higher than
prime
the
rate. So
yeah.
it's an oxymoron. But it's
Mm-hmm.
blamed on subprime borrowers when actually it was fraud on the part of finance in terms of creating derivatives and which failed, and then they got the Federal Reserve to send them money to bail them out, buying worthless junk bonds, derivatives as junk bonds, and so the financial institutions through the 2008 crisis, they increased their wealth tremendously, while ordinary people were losing their houses and losing their jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And so this narrative that's out there that is propagated by the mainstream media, because mainstream and corporate media is corporate media, tells the story that basically poor folks are the cause of all of the problems here, and the rich folks are well they're just desperate for a better situation. They're the job creators,
Yep,
and
that's
so
what we hear.
we should send them as much money as possible, because if we do that, they'll create a job for us. All of that is nonsense. It's propaganda. It's a myth, and it's a myth that I hope more and more people are becoming aware of, if only because of social media shows like this and other places where this is being discussed, including Charlemagne the God show, with the sister being fired because she told the
Yeah,
truth.
that's, I mean, it's just weird that look, a broken clock is right twice a day. And it's weird that Tiffany Cross was right about
Hmm.
the way the economy is talked about in the context of Black people in this country. But yeah, clearly she ran afoul of the powers that be with a lot of things. It wasn't just
Right.
those couple of things. I think that she thought that she could be her whole self, and they
Hmm.
quickly let her know, no, we don't want you to be your whole self. We want you to be the black face of the State Department narrative, so you
Hmm.
can give that narrative to Black people
Right.
that we hope your show will draw in to view our network. And yeah,
Hmm.
it didn't work out so well for her. But the interest rates, the Federal Reserve has raised the interest rates again. And what you point out, Dr. Tawhid, in this article about the jobs report, they actually talk about the prospect of continuing labor shortages and elevated wage growth, just ridiculous, will likely mean more hefty interest rate hikes by the Federal Reserve, determined to tame inflation, stuck just below a 40-year high at 8.2%. So
Hmm. Hmm.
this all of this misinformation, all of this propaganda feeds the continued price gouging of working class and poor people through the increase of interest rates that the Federal Reserve is doing, and they just did another one.
Right. The Federal Reserve, if you allow the Federal Reserve to get involved in trying to manage the economy, they can only do that one way. That is to raise or lower interest rates. And in a time of inflation, their only tool is to raise interest rates. Now, that might be a proper thing to do if we had an excess of demand. If people had so much money, they were out spending and so forth, and prices were going up. But that's not what's causing this inflation. There are two things that are driving this inflation. One is the continuing supply crisis. We have fewer products being imported into this country, particularly from China, but also there are fewer products being manufactured in this country because of the inability to get raw materials or parts from other places. But there's increasing evidence that the greatest part of the increase in prices is simply corporate greed, that
Mm,
corporations are using inflation as an opportunity to raise their prices well above the increase in their costs. You think about it like this: a company is selling a product and they have costs, and they're going to make a profit. So let's divide the revenue, the price of the product, into profit and cost. If the costs go up and the price of the product has to go up only as much as the cost goes up, profit doesn't go up.
Right.
But if you raise the price of the product greater than the cost of producing the product, that increases your profits. And corporations are having a huge increase in profits. It happened during the pandemic, and then it's continuing as we get into this inflation, where corporations are just in what we call windfall profits. They are price gouging because they're raising the price of their products much higher than they need to raise them, and just to cover their costs. That is itself is evidence that it's price gouging that is causing inflation, not wages. You add that to the supply issues as well. Now, the Federal Reserve, in raising the interest rates, if this were a demand-driven process, what they intend to do is to slow down borrowing for things like houses, and borrowing for things like automobiles. It's going to take you. The interest rate is going to be higher to borrow for housing. I think the interest rate for mortgages is about 7% now. So people are saying, no, I'm not going to buy a house now and end up paying 3 times the price of the house because the interest rate is at 7%. So people are deferring their buying if they can. If a person is low income and has to go into their savings that they were saving to buy a house in order to pay their rent and so forth, now they don't have a down payment, right?
Right.
And so all those things will slow down buying of big ticket items like houses and so forth. That will slow down the economy. But the problem is, if this is a supply driven process, when you make interest rates higher, not only does it decrease demand for housing and autos and other kinds of financed items, it also makes it more expensive for business to expand. So supply actually decreases while demand decreases, and you end up with a recession. You end up with what we call stagflation,
Mm-hmm.
where you can have a high unemployment rate, but you have very little production because you've depressed both supply and demand in the economy, and that's where we're headed with the Fed. Now, Jerome Powell is saying that they're waiting for unemployment rates or the labor situation to show them when to stop increasing these interest rates. One of the problems that I have asked as a member of an organization, I won't mention it on the show, but it's an organization of Black economists. One of the things I've asked, because there are a number of members of that organization who are members of the Federal Reserve Board, Black
Ah.
economists. We have 3 Black economists on the Federal Reserve Board. I've asked a question of that forum, in that forum. When the unemployment rate, if Jerome Powell is looking for the unemployment rate, let's say for whites to go up to 4.4%, and that's kind of the number he's given, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the unemployment rate for blacks will be 8 to 9%.
Right.
Shouldn't Black economists kind of intervene and say, wait a minute,
Right.
earlier, well, why are we going to, if Jerome Powell was looking for a soft landing, but then he started talking about a hard landing. A hard landing for the economy in general is crash and burn for the Black community. We will
Mm.
have already been destroyed. And I think Black economists have an obligation to step up and say, no, we're not going to allow the Black community to be destroyed because of interest rate hikes, because unemployment rate will be so much higher. We have to do something else. And the something else that needs to be done is what the Biden administration can do in terms of they're threatening, the Biden administration is threatening to put a windfall profits tax in place
Mm-hmm.
to tax off that extra revenue and then put those into social programs like rent help and food assistance and all these other kind of programs. But I don't expect the Democrats to do this. So
Mm.
it's an empty promise. It's an empty threat. If it were a real threat, then the Biden administration would be able to actually help the economy and help those who are going to be very adversely affected in the economy.
Mm-hmm.
Republicans are certainly not going to do that.
Right.
But Democrats are not even promising to do that. They're
And it's
completely ignoring the economy.
and it's well within their power to
Yes,
do it. It
yes,
really is well within their power to do it. And it's just not even an issue for them. So you actually used a term twice that I think we have a question on: windfall profits.
yeah,
I didn't realize that is a specific thing. What is
yeah,
that?
yeah. A windfall profit. The term windfall comes from, here's a scenario: you have a tree, an apple tree,
Hmm.
and the apples are on it, and they're high up, you can't reach them. Then the wind comes along, blows the apples to the ground. Now you can just pick up apples on the ground. You didn't have to do anything. Didn't have to do any work to get the apples. So that is a windfall that you now. So corporations are making profits without having to actually produce anything of value for those products, right? They're just getting products. They're just raising prices because they can, and they have inflation as a cover. That's called a windfall profit. And there have been in places like, for example, when we had the natural disasters like the Hurricane Katrina, the price of bottled water, which would normally be $1, was going up to $5 a
Right.
bottle. Well, it wasn't that the cost of a bottle of water was going up enough to justify a $5. So companies that were selling, stores and so forth, that were selling these bottles of water at these increased prices were getting a windfall. And there was a tax that was now put on those profits to take that extra profit away from them. It was in Louisiana, so I don't know if the extra tax money was returned to the community in some way, but that would be a way of offsetting. Of actually, you would have corporations would begin to lower their prices because they can't benefit from it, from these windfall profits. Yeah.
Mm, wow. And the Biden administration, of course, David Silberg says that's the kind of thing he should do if he wants to get reelected in 2024. Yes, that empty husk of a man is really running again in 2024. Because honestly, the Democrats have not, there's nobody. There's no, the who, there's nobody. So, but he said, but they'd have to be a different party and not either one of the two main political parties either. He'd have to be an independent or, God forbid, a socialist, and and I actually told, this is just completely an aside. A couple of days ago, um, I did in my monologue for By Any Means Necessary that Eugene Debs ran for president on the
Yeah.
Socialist Party ticket in this country,
Hmm.
actually was able to have his name on the ballot for the Socialist Party
Hmm.
and was able to get 1 million votes while he was in prison. And he was in prison for delivering an anti-war speech that he was charged under the Espionage Act of 1917 on. So he was thrown in prison because he spoke out against World War One, and and specifically he said, the working class and the poor are the ones who fight the wars. And this
Hmm.
is where he says in that speech, yours is not to question why, yours is but to die. But if the working class and the poor are the ones who are going to fight the wars, then they are the ones who need to be at the forefront of determining peace.
Hmm.
So the president at the time didn't like the fact that he was speaking out against a war, thought that it was anti patriotic and whatnot, and literally threw him in prison. He had a
Hmm.
10-year sentence, and he ran for president as a socialist and got 1 million votes anyway. So
Hmm.
I told that to someone who never knew that there were at one time more than two parties that could run for presidential election in this
Hmm.
country. So the idea that we have to continue to vote for these two parties, not true, because it's never been true. And yes, the two-party system, both parties work very hard to make sure third parties don't get anywhere near the national ballot. I mean, the
Right.
Democrats,
Right.
they just sued in a few states to kick the Green Party off of ballots in some states. Again, they did this last presidential election, and they'll keep doing it because people don't think it's a big deal. But the fact that they uh, do continue to make it difficult for third parties to emerge as legitimate choices for people in the political sphere, it doesn't mean that it's impossible.
Right.
So, I think a part of changing people's perceptions about what is possible, what can be possible, I think Dr. Tawhid is showing them what once was that we're really not told about.
Yes, yeah, knowing that there is a history in this country of other than Democrats and Republicans, right, is certainly enlightening. I do wonder. I do think the Democratic Party has been emboldened by their kneecapping of Bernie Sanders.
Yes.
Because you remember the Sanders campaign sued the DNC, the
Hmm.
Democratic National Committee, in courts, and the DNC came up with their defense, which was, well, we could choose the nominee in a
Right.
smoke-filled back room.
Right. And there's
We don't
nothing.
actually have to have elections.
Yeah, we don't have to tell. Yeah, we're just
So,
being
so
nice by letting people vote. But
exactly,
really,
if the elections are sham, so what? We don't have to even have elections, and the court agreed.
hmm
And so it's been fully exposed that there's no democratic process going on here. They're choosing the candidates, and there's nothing that the public can do about them as a Democratic Party
right.
except to create their own party. you know,
I, how many times do we have to say it? I mean, we if this system is not designed to work for us, so we need to get rid of this system. We
yeah,
need to
and
stop voting for these people.
we've had a discussion some months ago on this, and the discussion was national parties are difficult to form, and in addition, who are we going to put up as a national candidate that we and all of the other candidates that need to support them, Congress and Senate and so forth, folks we would trust, because by the time someone enters politics at the local level and they get up to a process, the position of being able to run for Congress, they have already been compromised by corporate donations and other
Hmm.
kinds of lobbying and so forth. So we need to start this process of organizing for electoral office, and keep track of our candidates as they go through, have fundraising and other kinds of support for them, so that they are not compromised on the process of leading up to a national election.
Yeah,
It's not an easy thing. It's not a small thing to do. But it's right now, in this country, two parties. The system is structured to kind of generate two parties, as opposed to, for example, Europe, where you have dozens of parties and you have a proportional elections where you get 10% of the vote, you get 10% of the delegates, you get 20%, and
hmm
so you have to have coalitions of people that come together in a parliamentary process. This winner take all process in the U.S. naturally leads to a division into two parties,
hmm
the opposition and the loyal opposition, and they're both the same party. They're just two different faces of the same coin.
that's really exactly what they are. And speaking of the Biden administration, what happened to student loan forgiveness program? What happened to that?
Well, the student loan forgiveness process that Biden reluctantly put into place as a way of garnering votes in the midterms. $10,000 of forgiveness if your income is below 125,000. And
Hmm.
I have no problem with the 125,000 income process. But $10,000 is anemic compared to what others have been advocating. Even the NAACP came out and said that they wanted $50,000. Biden didn't get anywhere near that. But for a long time, the Biden administration was saying we don't have the legal authority to do this. And in that, I think they were actually setting up the lawsuit against once they did put it out there. Then they've given ammunition to those who are opposed to it to go to court and say, well, the Biden administration themselves said they didn't think they had legal authority to do this, and we agree, so they should stop this. And so Joe Biden, not only did Joe Biden never want to give student loan forgiveness, even though he campaigned on it, Joe Biden when he was senator, was a significant part of the problem of student loan debt that is overhanging so many people in the country, and particularly African American undergraduate students. I think the numbers, if I remember, is about 73% of white undergrads graduate with student loan debt. And I think it's 84, 86% of Black undergrads graduate with student loan debt. Both of those are averaging about $30,000 per student at debt. But it's higher than in the Black community because the need is greater.
Mhm.
And I don't think Joe Biden had any intention. $50,000 would wipe out pretty much all of that debt. $10,000 does a little bit, but if you've already given the opposition the ammunition that you don't think you legally have the right to do it, then you weren't serious about doing it. I think his pledge when he was running and doing the primary was day one. We on day one we would do
That's what he
student loan
said.
forgiveness.
Mhm.
Well, we're a long way past day one.
Yeah.
Student loan debt is a significant interference in the lives of people who are working people. And so we find, for example, millennials who have lots of student debt, Gen Zers as well.
Mhm.
Because if you're in my generation, you could go to school pretty much for free or very inexpensive. So later on, as tuition goes up, you get student loan debt increasing, and millennials and Gen Zers are delaying marriage. They're delaying family formation. They're unable to buy houses because their debt to income ratios are so high they can't qualify on an application. There are other things that would be made available to them if they didn't have the student loan debt. Some of my colleagues here at UMKC did a study, and that study showed that there would be almost no inflation from full
Wow.
forgiveness. We're talking about full forgiveness of
Wow.
the debt, almost no inflation, like 0.3%, which is like nothing right now, right? 0.3%. It would actually increase the gross domestic product because it would be an investment. It would unleash spending from people who are sending their money to finance companies. They could use it to buy houses and cars and other kinds of things. There would be an increased economic activity as a result of full forgiveness of the student loan debt process. It has almost no downsides, and the downsides are small.
Right.
But the Biden administration was never really inclined to do this because President Biden was the senator from MBNA. He carried the water of big banks when he was a
Mhm.
senator, and this is a continuing part of that.
Yeah. The fact is that, as you pointed out, Dr. Tawheed, um, Biden gave the Republicans the permission, pretty much,
Hmm.
the idea. I don't know that he gave them the idea, because but I think he made it clear that from the beginning, that he was expecting them to challenge
Hmm.
this, the student loan forgiveness program. and
Hmm.
and it seems to me that, if you're doing something that is the right thing to do, you don't go into it saying, well, I think they're going to sue me, but I'm going to do it and see what happens.
Right.
No, he knew very well that they were going to do this. And it's not
Mhm.
that because he didn't have the authority. that
Right.
that's
He
the
has the authority. Right.
it's not because he didn't have the authority. He just gave them the legal argument
Hmm.
to frame their lawsuit around. And what's happened now is that the student loan forgiveness program remains on hold while a federal appeals court considers a legal challenge brought by six GOP led states.
Hmm.
So now what happens is you can apply for student loan forgiveness through this application process.
Hmm.
Um, and the Biden administration continues to accept applications for student loan forgiveness, which is worth up to $20,000 per borrower, but it is not currently allowed to cancel student loan debt due to a temporary administrative hold put on the program by the 8th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals on October 21st. So this just happened.
Now,
And again,
yeah.
no, go ahead.
No, I was saying, now understand, the federal government canceling student loan debt doesn't mean that the lender doesn't get paid.
Right.
Those loans are federally guaranteed. And so when the debt is canceled or forgiven, the federal government will pay the debt, pay the lender the money. What
Hmm.
the lender doesn't get, of course, is the interest from now till
Right.
forever, and the fees and the other kind of things, which causes loans that, so a student borrows $10,000 and then can't pay it. 20 years later, they owe 50,000.
Hmm.
That's what would have been interrupted. So it's not like the finance companies, the lenders would have lost money. They don't lose that $10,000. They'll get that from the federal government. What they don't get is the fees. And so it's kind of ridiculous to actually argue that the federal government doesn't have the right to pay a finance company's loan off. They can do that. And they have the authority to do that by the Education Act. I think it's 1984. They have the Biden administration, the president, the executive branch has the authority to do that by law.
Hmm. Yeah. So, once again, we're given a bill of goods. We're sold a bait and switch about the economy, but the information we're given is never an accurate reflection of the reality that we live, the reality that most of us live. 30% of us
Mhm.
live in poverty. And this does not mean, Dr. Tawheed, that 70% of us are well off or middle class or
Right,
not
right,
struggling. I
right.
mean, what is the economic reality if 30% of
Mhm.
Black people in this country live below the or at or below the official poverty line
Right.
in this country? What is that? What are the economic realities for the rest of the 70%?
Well, the rest of the 70% is that what we call the working poor, who are able, if you are a minimum wage worker at 7.25 an hour, you're making about 15,000 a year if you're able to work full time. As a single person, you're above the poverty line, right? If you're a family of four, I think the poverty line is about 36,000.
Excuse me.
Which means that if you make less than that, you are in dire situation. But if you're making a little more than that, if you make $10 an hour, 40,000 a year, if that's your family income, you're not in poverty, right? Although at $40,000, the I think median income is somewhere around 56,000,
Right.
right? And so you're still significantly below the majority of income earners in this country.
Hmm.
And I don't have the distribution figures right at hand, but there are. If you want to look at the top of the distribution, I was talking to someone. There are about 750 billionaires in this country. Seven of them are black. If it were
Seven.
about seven, yeah. If it were, we could talk about those seven. But if it were proportional, it would be about 100 black billionaires, right? So we don't have our share of black billionaires, and going down the line, even of those who are middle income at 56,000, we don't have a proportional share of that. Our income stream is skewed. So yes, you're right. If you make $1 above that poverty level, 36,000, you're no longer in poverty, but you're still not doing very well, right? Now that those seven billionaires, I'm not suggesting that, and some people would suggest that we need to have 100 black billionaires as opposed to the seven, I don't think that would help the other
That's not what you're saying.
99.9%.
We should not be pushing for more black billionaires.
No. And so because there's an argument that I would make and others would make is that billionaires should not exist.
Mm,
Billionaires become billionaires because they don't pay their employees what they should be paying them, because they cut off benefits. Look, Jeff Bezos is a perfect example. Amazon used to be a company in which people had full-time work
hmm
and had benefits as a result of that. Now, the Affordable Care Act comes along, and I'm not blaming this particularly on the Affordable Care Act, but it says that if a person is working less than 36 hours a week, that you don't have to provide health insurance for them. And so Amazon, with many other companies, went to limiting their workers to less than 36 hours a week. They became part-time workers. They didn't get the benefits that they used to be getting, which meant that money goes into Jeff Bezos's bank account.
hmm
And so billionaires become billionaires because of what's called wage theft and benefit denial, and profiteering during inflation cycles and all these other kind of things. The idea that there should be someone who can make $1 billion in a lifetime is not because they're providing $1 billion worth of value. They are in fact stealing from working people.
You mean to tell me nobody does $1 billion worth of work, Doctor?
Yeah. What's that? $1 million a minute or something like that?
I think one of the most ridiculous things I saw this week, another complete aside, was when I guess I'm not I Yay, I guess that's how you pronounce it, um, was kicked off the billionaires list, the Forbes billionaires list,
Yeah,
because he lost
yes.
the endorsement from Adidas and whatnot. And why in the world did some of his fans create a GoFundMe to raise money to make Ye a billionaire again? I
I,
I'm
mm, mm,
just the level that is celebrity worship is a cancer all by itself, but that's a whole new level of misguided, because that month, I mean, we why are we not raising money to feed people, house people? And let me just say that Ye not being a so-called billionaire anymore, according to Forbes,
yeah,
whatever, I don't believe that at all. He
mhm,
still bought Parlor.
right.
He still bought the alternative, the right wing social media alternative social media site Parlor. He had enough money, enough millions to buy that.
Right.
So I just it is I think we're reaching a critical juncture in the life of capitalism in this country. Dr.
Yeah,
Tap.
yeah. I think it's obvious that there are some people who have absolutely too much money, and so they're willing to buy. There's this entity called a non-fungible token NFT,
Yeah.
and people are buying the rights to things that they cannot physically own. So there's a game that I became aware of property in San Francisco. Now, it's not the actual property, it's just a game that lists the property. It's kind of like a Monopoly game. You have Park Place and Boardwalk, and people are actually paying to own this virtual property. You don't actually own Fisherman's Wharf, you own the non fungible token for Fisherman's Wharf, and people are paying tens of thousands of dollars to own this. If you could do that, you have too much money. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the distribution of income means that there are people who have too much money, right?
hmm
And
hmm
it's showing up in these nonsense purchases, which do no value for anyone else. I guess it's the bragging rights of being able to do that. So I didn't know that there was a GoFundMe for Ye. Maybe it's Ye because his name's Kanye, right? So maybe it's
I
that.
don't know.
But But if that's what you want to do with your money, you probably have too much money. And perhaps it would be better, maybe persons who are more have more vision and more progressive. Maybe we do need to start a $1 billion GoFundMe for some for rent reform or rent support or something like that. For some that to actually help someone instead of, I guess, his fortunes have gone from 1.2 billion down to 400 million. I,
Oh,
I
oh,
feel for him.
oh, poor thing. Wow.
But I do want to say something. I've had discussions with people, including younger persons, about Kanye. Kanye has a mental illness. I think he knows he does, and so sometimes he can say things that are brilliant, and sometimes he can say things that are nonsense. He doesn't know the difference. He doesn't, his mania won't allow him to know the difference. And so the fact that he has so much influence is somewhat dangerous and maybe pathetic. That we look for leadership in people who are unstable.
Mm.
And he may be a genius in some areas, and I think he is. But in other areas, that genius shows itself out in craziness. And if his followers don't know the difference, then they've got a problem also. You know.
I mean, I think you raised some really great points. I think the fact that, we are watching a celebrity suffer clearly, mental health episodes, but it also, I think, raises this issue that is very uncomfortable with me, that, I think relegating his behavior to his mental health issues, I almost feel like that gives people with mental health issues a
Yeah.
bad name. I mean, because this is, you don't say things like slavery was a choice, run around talking about white lives matter because you have a mental illness. That's not,
Yeah.
you know. So I think, yes, I think that he absolutely, and he is, talked about his struggles with mental illness a while ago, but he's also said, look, I don't read. As if, because reading is somehow some type of weakness. He doesn't need to read, and that's very odd coming from someone who came from the parents he did.
Yes.
His mom
Yeah.
was an educator, his father was a revolutionary. um so there are so many contradictions, I think, in this person, and um the way we regard him, and the way people either make excuses for him, or the reasons people dismiss him. I am of the opinion, and I've said this to several people, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to psychoanalyze this guy,
Hmm.
because he has really said things that I think are pretty clear. I'm going to depart with you a little bit, Dr. Tawheed. I actually don't believe that he doesn't know what he's saying. I think he absolutely
Hmm.
knows what he's saying.
Hmm.
I think he believes every bit of it, because I think he believes that he is above
Hmm.
all of these, petty little struggles that the rest of us mere mortals have to deal with. He doesn't have to deal with them because he's yay. So
Hmm.
he thinks on a higher plane.
Hmm.
And that has allowed him, I think, to get away with saying things that if you and I and folks we know had said, we would have been rightfully dragged across the carpet
Hmm.
for saying the ridiculous and, quite honestly, harmful and dangerous things that he
Right.
has said. But because he's established himself as a genius as far as rap is concerned, and then he has translated that, to say,
Hmm.
well, I am, I think, on a higher plane than other people because I am Kanye West,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Not because he's smarter than anyone, but because he really is a lyrical genius, I think. And
Hmm.
he's just stretched that out to cover anything else.
Hmm.
And where the mental illness emerged, who knows? I think it plays a part in it,
Hmm.
but I think mostly Kanye West is fulfilling what he thinks of himself. He does think, I think, that he is above other people, that he
Hmm.
is better than other people. He sees things differently. He sees the whole chessboard, and he's making these grand, you know, chess moves that we mere mortals
Hmm.
um, can't figure out.
Yeah.
And to that degree, I call bullshit on everything he says and
Yeah.
does, because to me that's just the arrogance of celebrity, right?
I,
And
yeah, I, yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I agree that's the case. I'm not dismissing the craziness of what he says every other word. I'm not dismissing that. But I really don't think he knows the difference between his genius and his craziness.
Mm,
That I think I agree with you. He believes everything he says, and I do agree that part of it is, he has been elevated as a celebrity to believe his own nonsense as being important. I don't think of him any different in that context than Jeff Bezos,
okay.
who has made statements about space travel and
Hmm.
other kinds of things, when he was doing his trips. These are persons who have talent in some areas. They get lots of money, lots of recognition, and every other word is something that's crazy. They believe it, and they have lots of followers who also give them validation for what they believe. And when you've been given that kind of validation, then you can pretty much say almost anything, and someone will try to raise money for you. So the Jeff Bezos, the Elon Musk, these folks all have that I think that same issue. Kanye, of course, is I think also suffering. Amos Wilson has a diagnosis of post traumatic enslavement disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Many of us have that, but he gets to write about it and to rap about it and to influence social media about it
Right.
in a way that quote some of us who are maybe have that problem don't get the notoriety from. And so it is the a problem of celebrity as well. He's in a he's in a looking glass, if you will, and he's performing, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And his craziness is part of his performance. And so there's never in telling what he might say. But I do think there is the underlying mental illness. I think is there, and for me that brings a little sympathy, if you will, to his situation.
Mm.
For me.
And yeah, that post-traumatic slave syndrome, I remember reading Dr. Joy DeGroy's study on that many
Hmm.
years ago, and it strikes me that without clear political education, the trauma we all endure from that,
Hmm.
a lot of us could end up as misguided as Kanye West
Right.
is. And but anyway, like I
And,
said,
and, and
mhm. No, go ahead.
no, and I was going to say Candace Owens, though I think is just pure opportunist.
Yeah, yeah. This
That's
she
just.
is a woman who filed, and I believe she won a lawsuit for discrimination, racial
Mm,
discrimination, and now she, oh come on. um, but I think that whatever social or uh socioeconomic, certainly, issues that we talk about, I think most of them could be undercut. I'm not going to say solved, because people will always be people, but a lot of them will be, a lot of their efficacy will be reduced with socialism. So for me, the answer to all of these issues are scientific socialism. And that's what we strive for. At least that's what I strive for. But until then, until we get there, we have got to understand the truth and the realities about the economic condition that Black people are in. And I want to thank Dr. Tawheed so much for being with us this week and uncovering the lies and the spin and the propaganda and making economics plain for us, Black economically speaking, once again.
Thank you. It's been very enjoyable as always. Looking forward to the next time we meet. We'll always have something to talk about.
That's true. As long as capitalism exists, we will always have something to talk about.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you all so much. Appreciate you for hanging out with us tonight. Follow Luke Mon Nation on Patreon, patreon.com/Luke Nation. I'm back in the studio on By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik every day, at least for a couple of months while I get a little break and things heal and I get ready for the next phase in my training. Excuse me. So I'm doing my monologues again. So you'll get at least two fresh new monologues every week, and you can access them as a patron on Luke Mon Nation, patreon.com/Luke Mon Nation, LuqMannation. And please support Black Power Media on Patreon, patreon.com Black Power Media. And if you are watching on Black Power Media, subscribe to Black Power Media so you can get notified when everyone post any content on this channel. We've got great content, a little bit of something for everybody. We appreciate you so much. Peace and love to all of you. Take really good care of yourselves and each other. And remember, a luta continua, the struggle continues, but Victoria acerta, victory is certain. Peace.